And if you can, nail one of those every day, you're doing great. If you can nail two, even better. And every once in a while you hit three, boom. That's what's going to increase longevity.
You're listening to the Ethos Athletes podcast, where we believe that your health is the number one resource you need to accomplish your dreams. My name is Dr. Matthew Hernandez, and I'm a physician dedicated to helping my patients maintain their active lifestyle and continue doing what they love. I'm sitting down with other experts so that we can provide our listeners with the knowledge they need to improve their health and live their best life. Hey everyone, this is Dr. Matthew Hernandez, and you're listening to the Ethos Athletes podcast. Today we're going to be talking about metabolic testing as well as Vo2 Max testing. I went to a conference a little over a year ago, and at the medical conference, Dr. Peter Attia, some of you who you may be familiar with, was speaking, and he threw out a pearl in that talk. He said, when you're looking at a single test that can check your overall fitness, your overall aging process, or so you can make sure that you're not aging super fast, just your overall health, the test that he had said to perform to check all that was a Vo2 Max test. I knew a little bit about this information. I wanted to learn more on this particular test. And so I did some research, and I found our guest speaker today to talk about this particular test and all the things that it can do and we can do with this information. So for our podcast today, I have Anna Sparks, who's the owner of Sparks Systems here in Scottsdale. She has a master's in exercise physiology and is a metabolic efficiency training specialist. So Anna, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks.
Running Vo2 Max tests and doing metabolic testing is what you do. I mean, that is the profession you've chosen to go in. You do this every day. You've seen a lot of data, and you've been able to extract a lot of information from all this. Before we get into breaking this test down, really understanding what it entails, the information we can learn, let's hear a little bit about your journey to how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, no problems. I grew up in the South, so I'm from Arkansas. And did my undergrad in exercise science, my master's in exercise physiology, and I was a soccer player. So always grew up as an athlete and ended up going on a full soccer scholarship to Ole Miss, which is the University of Mississippi. Did my undergrad and my master's there. And during my master's, I was a graduate assistant strength and conditioning coach. And so I always knew that everything I was learning in my degree program, I was able to apply to myself right away. And that was super fulfilling. It was almost like just always a case study on myself.
Yeah. In
my exercise testing and prescription class, we would do Vo2 Max testing. And I always wanted to be a subject because I was, I wanted to know everything I could about this test. I wanted to know everything I could about my physiology. And also I wanted to win. I wanted to beat that test. And that led me down this path of, once I finished my master's degree, I actually took the job coaching soccer at the University of Arkansas. Coached at Arkansas for 4 years. Again, overall health was huge for me, not only for myself, but for my players and teaching them as much as I could. Went from the University of Arkansas to Arizona State University to coach soccer. I was assistant there, and then actually decided I still wanted to be competitive myself. And I went into cycling, road cycling. So got called into the Olympic Training Center, got picked up by a women's professional team, and then decided, I've got enough money put away that if I do this for 1 year, it'll be okay. I can still pay my mortgage. And 1 year turned into 6 years that I raced in the women's pro circuit.
That's awesome.
And again, still during all of that time, knowing all about your physiology and how can you hack your health essentially for longevity, I was constantly testing myself. I found another exercise physiologist that would help me go over the data. And I just was enthralled with the data and everything that the test could offer. And so I ended up opening up my own company as I was racing, and I was doing coaching. So I was coaching clients and making sure that their nutrition and their exercise, that they mimicked each other so that we would get the most bang, and then put together, a periodization model to progress them along. But every client that I ever worked with, they always started with having a metabolic test and a VO2 max test. Okay. So, and I know that we'll go into that a lot more, later, but the information that is gleaned from this test and then repeating the test to track improvements, it's so powerful and so impactful and can really not only be very motivating for athletes and clients in general, but it's basically your checkup, so that you can also be able to compare yourself to other people in your age group and demographic for your overall health. So
the perfect test for competitive people, right?
Which I think secretly all of us are competitive.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. The research I've done when we're looking at this particular test, it really gives us a lot of information for a number of different things. So if you're someone who's interested in just making sure that you're, not aging super fast, this test is good for that. If you're a competitive athlete who's wanting to, try and get another edge, this is a good test to check that. If you're just wanting to look at your overall health, this is another thing that we can do with this particular one. So let's start with, I know there's two, from the research I've done, there's two aspects to this test. So there's a VO2 max, which some people are maybe familiar with. And then there's this whole aspect that is in addition to the VO2 max, which is a metabolic test, which is something that in traditional medicine is not really looked at, but this is something that you do specifically, correct?
Yes.
Awesome.
So you are right in that most people have heard of the term VO2 max test. And essentially a VO2 max test is just a cardiopulmonary stress test. So when someone goes in for a stress test, they're going to take them to their VO2 max. The main goal with the VO2 max test is that having a higher VO2 is directly correlated with a lower chance of developing cardiovascular disease. So we're looking at what does your overall physiology look like? And two, how well are your heart and lungs working together? But that VO2 max during this test is just literally one metric that we get. So before that max takes place, that's usually really towards the end of the test. You have all of this metabolism data leading up to that max. And that's what I got really entrenched into, going, hold on, how come every time they do these VO2 max tests, they never really talk about everything going on up to that one part? So I really started diving into the metabolism data. And so what you would find with the beginning of the test, it's more of a nutrition assessment.
Okay.
And then after you hit a sub-max level, now it kind of becomes more of a fitness assessment. Okay. And once you hit that overall, that VO2 max. So when we start, we actually do two tests. And we start with a resting metabolic test. Okay. And a resting metabolic test is going to tell us how many calories you need every day just for survival, just for brain function. But the real power is not necessarily in the amount of calories you need, but what percentage of those calories is coming from fat and what is coming from carbohydrate. Because now we can see what the body is selecting for fuel when we are just trying to live. And obviously, we would like for our bodies to be utilizing more fat for fuel, since that's our natural metabolic state, than carbohydrate. For instance, if I had someone that came in and during their resting test, we saw that they were, 70% of their calories were coming from carbohydrate, and 30% were coming from fat, then I would immediately have them go and get some blood work. We would start looking at fasting insulin. We would look at A1Cs because their bodies are metabolizing sugar at rest at a rapid rate. And so this test is a great way. And I wouldn't say that we identify, diabetes or insulin resistance right away, but I'll tell you, we're pretty close at determining that just from doing that resting test. Awesome. So we take a client right from the resting test into a metabolic efficiency test that is going to take them to their VO2 max, right? So it's an active metabolic test. Again, actually, let me back up a little bit and tell you exactly what the test actually looks like.
Yeah.
The resting, you're going to sit comfortably in a chair. You're going to have a mask placed on your face to collect your expired gases. So you're hooked up to our metabolic cart. And you're just going to sit comfortably in that chair 15 to 20 minutes. And we're going to look at that CO2 that's expired and that O2 that's taken in. And then we'll determine exactly what your resting metabolic rate is. Okay. And then we move you to either a treadmill or an upright bicycle for the active metabolic part. Again, still mask on your face, but now we're going to take you through a graded exercise test. So in the beginning of that test, the stages are a little bit longer. The intensity is very low as we're warming you up, but we're really looking at what is that metabolism doing now that we are starting to get the heart rate up a little bit. We're starting to raise the intensity. So if we were wanting to give someone an exercise protocol that's going to have them maximize fat utilization, we need to know that exact heart rate and that exact intensity in which they change over from utilizing fat for fuel to utilizing carbohydrate. And we call that point their metabolic efficiency point. And so during the beginning of this test, it's very slow lead up. And then we begin to add a little bit more intensity as we progress them along. So if they're on a bike, it's like they're warming up, heading over to a climb. And then they're just going to gradually start going up this climb. It's kind of how it feels like for them, and they're just breathing into this mask. We're collecting all their heart rate data as well. And so we take them through these different stages and we'll be able to tell them what their aerobic threshold is, their lactate threshold. And then once we hit that lactate threshold or that sub-max level, we then move a little bit more quickly through the last several stages in order to get to that VO2 max.
Okay.
And once we hit that, VO2 max now, and it doesn't mean that the test stops right when they hit their VO2 max. Some people will continue going after that VO2 max. And that's totally fine. We let them go all the way till they are ready to be done, or we start to see their numbers dropping. And then we know that this test is done, take them right into recovery, and then we go over all of their data after that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Right on. So you start out with the resting metabolic, which is just, you sitting there, you're taking measuring the gas exchange essentially for that person. And then from there, you start the metabolic process, you hit the lactate, or so you have your first changeover that you talked about. So that changeover is going from which macronutrient to which?
You're going from typically fat, mainly fat utilization, to carbohydrate utilization. Okay. And now there's going to be a time in which there's a mix of both, right? So usually once they hit that lactate threshold, they're now completely anaerobic. Well, we know that they're just going to be using glycogen. They're just going to be using those carbohydrate, and that fat utilization drops off drastically. Those are the times that they're working pretty intensely.
Okay.
And producing, a lot of lactic acid or hydrogen, actually. So they're not feeling very good, and you will see on this test too, their body starting to change. You start to see once they hit that submax level, really like everything about them begins to change, as well as the respiratory rate, and so we're measuring all of these things and you can see like everything starting to take place. And obviously we're asking them the entire time their rating of perceived exertion, so it's not, you're kind of getting a really good idea too of how in tune they are with their bodies, because if they know that they're at, a 8 RPE, that they are working extremely hard. And this is very, very difficult. And if you're looking at their numbers and it's correlating with that same difficulty, then, you're like, okay, this person, they understand that it's getting painful and I really would like to stop. Like, okay. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't like this pain. So.
And when we're talking about, fat and carbs, so when you're saying they're transitioning from fat to carb, is it fat being triglycerides, carb being glycogen? Is that what you're, okay.
Yeah. How all of this works is, every morning when we wake up, we have 1 teaspoon of blood sugar flowing through our bodies. And that's where our bodies want to be. And the moment we introduce food in, we're going to have, and typically if it's something that's higher in carbohydrate, we're going to have a blood sugar response. And so blood sugar is going to go up, and then insulin is going to be released from the pancreas. It's going to come out to try to bring that blood sugar back down to that 1 teaspoon because that's where it wants to be. But then what happens is we're hungry again. And so now we eat maybe, a granola bar or something. blood sugar goes back up, more insulin comes out. And so what happens is that this continues to happen all day. And we stay in this elevated insulin state and we end up developing diabetes or insulin resistance and obesity. We gain weight. Right. And so knowing how to address that daily nutrition to make sure that we are not having this elevated insulin state, all day, every day. Well, you first measure it. And so now we know exactly what the body is choosing for fuel, and then we can change it. Anything that you can measure, you can make it better.
Yeah.
And so having this measurement from the get-go and then providing the proper daily nutrition, the proper movement, the proper breathing, which that breathing component is that stress management, and then remeasuring to see, did we improve? Did we improve that efficiency, and then make more modifications and then continue on. So you're absolutely right. This is a super powerful test.
Yeah. When we're looking at them hitting their lactate threshold, are their lactate levels something that you're able to measure through this test or? Okay.
Yeah. So obviously, that usually taking blood lactate, and this we're just actually measuring through their gas exchange. So we can see when they move from an aerobic state to an anaerobic state. And that's what is indicative of them moving from their aerobic threshold into that lactate threshold, right? Okay. And that lactic acid is just building. It's accumulating in their muscles, spills over into their blood. Their blood's in direct contact with their brain, and their brain's like, wait, hold on. It's getting really acidic in here. I'm going to make the muscle stop contracting. And so they always wonder when they're out there exercising, why all of a sudden they still feel like they're working so hard, but their speed is going down, or they're just, like not gaining ground like they were before.
Right.
And it's because the brain is going, we're not okay. Yeah. And so typically we really work with people on breathing as well and really expelling that CO2 to buffer that kind of that lactic acid accumulation, or try to keep their brains calm longer.
They pass, or they go past this threshold of lactic acid, and then they eventually hit their VO2 max. And the VO2 max is one more time a measurement of.
So it's going to tell us the maximum amount of oxygen that they can consume that goes to the working muscles.
Okay. Let's talk about how we can go in, like when we get this data, different patterns that you typically see with this, and how you can go and use this a little bit and for your own knowledge and on your health and performance.
Well, so first of all, think about VO2 max. Let's talk about what it's measured in, right? Yeah. So we have relative VO2, and relative VO2 is measured in milliliters per kilogram per minute. So that kilograms in there takes your body weight into the equation. And so the second way that VO2 is measured is your absolute VO2, and that's measured in liters per minute. So, and obviously that takes your body weight out of the equation. So say that you came in yesterday and tested with me, and then you came in again and say that your VO2, your relative VO2 was, let's just say it was 45 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And then next week you came in and you retested, and your VO2 was, say that you had lost 10 pounds. Your VO2 now is at like a 46.2 or something like that. It's not that you are now able to consume and utilize more oxygen. It's just that you've lost weight. That relative number went up. But that absolute number, let's say that it was at a 2.5, it's probably still going to be exactly at a 2.5 liters per minute. Does that make sense? So you're now able to compare apples to apples.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're looking at overtime.
What's a good score when we're looking at like absolute VO2 max? Like, what kind of give us the breakdown of what are the ranges as far as like what's good, what's bad, what's like in the middle, whatever that looks like?
There's a range. So depending upon your age and your gender, typically males usually would have higher VO2s. I mean, they just have, one, larger muscle mass. Usually their lungs, their chest cavity is a little bit larger. So they would have their capabilities to consume and utilize oxygen is usually a little bit higher. But then you get some of these phenomenal, athletes in there, and they just, blow it up. So usually if you're looking through magazines and different, even science articles, they usually only talk about VO2 as relative VO2. So it's pretty skewed.
Yeah,
And
makes sense.
every time you look at relative VO2, it's taking body weight into the equation. And so you don't really necessarily get the whole picture, whenever you're doing a comparison. But still, I don't know if you'll find a chart out there that would show absolute VO2 comparing, men in their age group. So you'll only find it typically in relative, right? Milliliters per kilogram per minute. So as you age, typically those VO2 numbers begin to come down. We test a lot of young kids, and we know that their capabilities of increasing VO2, upwards of 10 to 15%, they can go up. As they age. But like you and I, our VO2s, if we saw even minute changes in VO2, it would be like a huge win. It would be massive, massive. So, when people come in and do this testing, they definitely can improve, but we first start with addressing that daily nutrition.
Right.
And then we move to movement, to exercise. And we're also the entire time talking a lot about breathing and stress management in order to increase and improve that VO2 max.
Awesome. When we're looking at this particular test, and this goes not only for the metabolic or for the VO2, but also the metabolic, what are some of the different factors that can influence either negatively and positively either of these tests?
Stress levels are massive. So how well are you sleeping? Your daily nutrition. So if you are eating things, highly processed diet is a major, major factor when we're eating, a lot of processed oils. So weight, being a huge determinant of metabolic health, blood sugar, obviously. So when we talk about metabolic efficiency is just blood sugar optimization. And if you want to optimize someone's blood sugar, you start with addressing what they're putting in the tank on a daily basis. And if we can get the sugar down, if not eliminated altogether, then we're well on our way. If people have any disease in their history, so cardiovascular disease, any autoimmune disease, those are going to be big factors in what we're going to see in the test.
Awesome. So when we're looking at the metabolic testing, is there a way to change? So you talked about there being this transition period where they transition from fat to carb. Is there a way to things that we can do that will prolong that transition period? Or, I'm assuming we want to prolong it, right? Because the longer it takes for us to get into glycogen breakdown, then the more efficiently we're using our energy, correct?
Correct. And so our goal is always to move that metabolic efficiency point, that point in which we change over from utilizing primarily fat for fuel to using primarily glycogen or carbohydrate. We want to move that to the right. We want to have that happen at a higher intensity or a higher heart rate, you know? And so how do we do that? 75% of that is going to come from that daily nutrition. 25% will come from that exercise, those exercise intensities. And it's really not all about the exercise per se, as it is about increasing that respiratory rate, about being able to expel more of that CO2.
So it becomes like a lung capacity or a lung efficiency.
Teaching people to not, if you think about it, did anyone ever teach you how to breathe properly?
Right.
And so we naturally breathe from our chest, and it's these short, and especially if you were to start exercising, most of us definitely utilize your breath to calm your brain, And so if we can teach people to do that on a, regular basis, we're going to end up increasing their metabolic efficiency.
Okay, so as we move this metabolic efficiency stat to the right and get it more, that transition better, obviously we'll have an increase in performance, but can you speak a little bit to the effect it has on anti-aging and why we're able to make that transition and why that's important?
Absolutely. So before I go into that, though, I think that we should talk about the two fuel tanks, which will then clear up maybe even a little bit of confusion, but lead into why it is so important for longevity. Okay, So the two fuel tanks that we have our glycogen or our carbohydrate, and we can store 1,200 to 1,500 calories of glycogen in our liver and in our muscles. And it's a really quick burning fuel. So once we burn through that, what happens is that we're hungry. again. Like we will want to refuel. The second tank that we have is our fat tank. And I'm not talking about, the fat that is on your stomach or on your booty. I'm talking about the fat within your cells. Okay. We can store about 50 to 80,000 calories of energy within our fat, within our cells. And that is our natural metabolic state. That's what we want to use on a daily basis. But due to the standard American diet and us having a plethora of food around us all the time, we're constantly eating. And if we're eating high carbohydrate or highly processed foods, then our bodies are just pulling from that small tank, which means that we're constantly wanting to refuel. We're constantly wanting to eat more. And so we never give our bodies a chance to actually utilize that stored energy, that stored fat. That's how we were made. We were made to not necessarily have all this food all the time and being in that fed state and having insulin being able to be quiet, having our livers to have a rest. So I'm sure that you guys have heard a lot about intermittent fasting. It's like such a high, kind of charged thing right now. And that's what it teaches you, is that we don't need to be in this fed state all day, every day, that there are periods where we are in the non-fed state. And what happens is that once we become metabolically efficient or even more like fat adapted, our bodies are able to tap into that stored energy that's always there. Because every time we eat, we will use some for energy and we'll store some. And so we've got truckloads of energy on board. We're not going to starve to death. We're not going to die. And so when you're looking for longevity, really, like the main thing to keep in mind would be that not calorie restriction, but not being, like I said, in this fed state all the time. That leads to longevity. And so when you think about your nutrition framework, the nutrition framework you need to think about is three things: the composition of your macronutrients, the timing of your macronutrients, and the quantity of your macronutrients. And if you can, nail one of those every day, you're doing great. If you can nail two, even better. And every once in a while you hit three, boom, that's what's going to increase longevity.
Thank you for clarifying that a little bit more. And I would imagine the three things that you said, as far as the timing, the composition, all that stuff, if we're working on an athlete, that we're working on the performance aspect, that also ties into it as well, correct?
100%. Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. It applies to everyone. That's what their nutrition framework needs to look like. So yes, for increased performance, for increased longevity, we do work with a lot of athletes, and they come to us and they say, oh, I've got this big event later in the year, and this is what I want to prepare for. And I'm like, absolutely, got you. We can do that. But I know that I'm preparing them for the rest of their lives. Like, I'm going to equip them with the tools for that longevity. I'm going to optimize their blood sugar. So whatever their goals be, maybe it's this event, maybe it is to have sustained energy to be on their game, every day in their office, that they want energy to be able to play with their grandkids. We work with a lot of males that are just really looking for that vitality. They want to feel good.
Yeah.
And so we know that whatever their goals are, we first have to provide them with that metabolic efficiency, that blood sugar. We optimize their blood sugar, we can do anything.
Awesome. No, that's perfect. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, everything that you've talked about, it makes it sound like the perfect test for a number of different individuals. So it could be performance, it could be longevity, it could be screening, like a pre-screening to make sure that you're not going into diabetes, heart disease, all those things, and just part of good general wellness check. I think you've really shed a lot of light on how great this test can be for individuals who are wanting to be proactive in their health.
You just brought up a great point that I don't think that I did touch on very well, but we had a lot of doctors that were utilizing our testing to screen for people that were about to have surgery. If their VO2s were not high enough, then they knew that they should not be going under the knife, that they would not do well under anesthesia, nor would they have a good outcome potentially in that surgery, that it was putting them at risk. So we had a lot of doctors that would use our testing for screening purposes to see if a patient was ready for surgery. If they weren't, say that their numbers came back low, then they would definitely go into our program. We would start working with them on their nutrition, on their exercise, on their stress management, and get them to a place that they could potentially be able to go and have that surgery that they were needing.
That's cool. I didn't realize that you could use it for that particular aspect. So that's a great correlation. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up? That we do a lot of information at our listeners. So anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up the show?
If anybody has any questions, like always available and would love to be a resource, and just, understanding that having this data on yourself, it doesn't matter if you are an elite athlete, if you are an executive, if you are, a stay-at-home mom, this is for your overall health. And I'll tell you now, in the midst of all of this COVID, health needs to be on the forefront.
Yeah.
And so knowing exactly what is going on under the hood is probably the best gift that you could give to yourself for that self-care. And, being able to find out this information, take all of the guesswork out of it and actually have it measured. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that. And I appreciate it. Like I said, I think we threw a lot of information at everybody, so hopefully they can go and learn a little bit more about this particular test. And I'm going to be putting Anna's information and Spark Systems information on the episode description. So feel free to check that out. And you can contact them if you have any questions or want to learn more about this test, or obviously are interested in getting the test. She's here in Scottsdale, so should be able to make a quick drive over. Anna, thank you so much for taking the time to be on this episode and really educate us on the VO2 Max and metabolic testing.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, our pleasure. Everyone, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Do you know someone that is constantly busy and on the go? They probably wish that they can just hit a pause button for a brief moment to slow down their chaotic life. At Body Sense Massage by Ethos, we believe in nurturing and enhancing the greatest asset you have, you. Our therapists take time with each individual to understand their needs and provide a place to escape and recharge. Ask our team how you can schedule an appointment today so that you can tune out the world and tune into you.